Just hours from now, President Trump and President Putin are set to meet. Things were always going to be a little awkward to begin with. And then came the indictments of a dozen Russians laid out in forensic detail. It leaves a lot of questions, like whether holding those accountable will come up in their conversation.
The Russians who were indicted, would you ask Putin to send them here?
Well, I might. I hadn't thought of that, but certainly I'll be asking about it. But again, this was during the Obama administration.
Presented with all of this new information, there's also the question of how hard the president will press Vladimir Putin on his government's role.
I know you'll ask, will we be talking about meddling? And I will absolutely bring that up. I don't think you'll have any, gee, I did it, you got me. There won't be a Perry Mason here, I don't think, but you never know what happens, right?
Jonathan Swan of Axios, citing multiple sources close to Trump, reports that if and when Trump confronts Putin tomorrow, it won't be with any genuine seriousness or enthusiasm. The president reportedly no longer doubts the intelligence assessment. Quote, he just can't get past, a senior administration official told Axios, his voice trailing off, quote, that it's about his election. All of this while the president casually recasts who's a friend and who's a foe.
Who's your biggest competitor, your biggest foe globally right now?
Well, I think we have a lot of foes. I think the European Union is a foe, what they do to us in trade. And now, you wouldn't think of the European Union, but they're a foe. Russia's a foe in certain respects. China's a foe economically, certainly. They're a foe. But that doesn't mean they're bad. It doesn't mean anything. It means that they're competitors. They want to do well, and we want to do well.
I want to welcome in my panel, former chief of staff at both the CIA and the Department of Defense, and also an MSNBC national security analyst, Jeremy Bash, politics reporter for the Daily Beast, and MSNBC contributor, Betsy Woodruff, the man who puts memo in Memoli, NBC News national political reporter Mike Memoli, joining us from London, global politics fellow at the London School of Economics and Washington Post columnist Brian Klaas, and from Helsinki, Finland, NBC News chief foreign affairs correspondent and the host of Andrea Mitchell Reports on MSNBC, Andrea Mitchell. Andrea, it's such an honor to have you here. Thank you so much for staying up so late with us.
Thank
you
you
have watched so many of these meetings, dozens of these types of meetings over the years with foreign leaders, and this one seems like, I suppose, everything this president does, stunning in a way that is extraordinarily difficult to kind of understand and explain. What's your latest reporting going into this summit? And can you put it in some historical context? I mean, what do you think is important here and different than what you've seen before?
Sure. I think this is unique because we've never had a summit with a KGB spy master, someone who has, completely studied and examined Donald Trump, and a president who spent the weekend golfing and has not been preparing. There were no principal meetings, no planning for this summit, no deeply, organized strategy sessions. What is the agenda? What are the goals? What do they want to get out of it? So we could be surprised. They could come out and say that we've made progress on nuclear weapons, that we're going to revive, expand, extend the START nuclear weapons agreement, which expires after 2022. But will Donald Trump confront Putin on the fact that he's already busted out of one medium range, the INF treaty, by deploying a banned missile? Unlikely. He doesn't know those kind of details. He hasn't been with his advisors. We've seen him all over the lot as he crisscrosses Europe the last week. And it's really startling that he's going to be meeting one-on-one. We're not going to have a record of this one-on-one meeting. And that is alarming to a lot of former advisors in both political parties who have worked so closely to plan a summit like this. This is even less planned and more impromptu than Singapore was, and that's saying a lot.
Andrea, I mean, this is somebody, Vladimir Putin has a history of being, as you point out, the former KGB official who does things to either flatter and try to embrace his host in a way that puts them off guard, as he did with George W. Bush, or tries to unsettle them, as he did with Angela Merkel at times. Do we have any indication that that's kind of where Vladimir Putin might be going with this? And the last time that they did talk, there seems to be some agreement on how to handle issues in Syria that then, quite frankly, Putin walked away from. It seems like the policy stakes could be very high.
Well, there are a lot of issues there, especially with Syria, because the administration is planning really ramping up its very aggressive posture on both sanctions and other activities against Iran. They are keying to some big decisions on Iran coming, and they've already, as we reported over the weekend, told the top 3 European allies who were very concerned about the Iran nuclear deal, about our withdrawal from the nuclear deal, that there will be no waivers, no exceptions, that they are going to, their companies are going to have to get out of Tehran or risk not doing business with the United States, which is not a choice for them. They have to be able to trade in dollars, deal with American banks. So they have to get out of Iran. This is going to squeeze Iran. There are other steps that are being taken on the energy front to compensate for what may be will be a drop in Iranian oil exports if these other major European companies, France, Britain, and Germany, have to pull out. So there's a lot there. And this conversation about Syria, where Vladimir Putin has been working with Iran, gets really complicated on the ground. Is this a way of the U.S. backing out of Syria, abandoning the rebels, saying we're doing it because of Iran, and somehow working with Putin, but not to undercut Assad, to continue propping up his client, Bashar al-Assad? So there's that. But primarily on the Mueller front, every signal from everything the president has said in the last days, months, but particularly since the indictment, is to blame the victim, blame the Democrats for not defending themselves better, blame Obama, saying it happened on his watch, out of context, and give Putin and the Kremlin a free ride.
Jeremy Bash, to Andrea's point on that, how do you think these two things interact, what you learned in the Mueller investigation? Obviously, you know, the president knew that this was going to happen going into it. He's going forward anyway.
Well, first, on the summit that we're going to see unfold here in the next 10 hours, this is the most significant shift in American foreign policy in the post-World War II era. I don't think we should underplay that. First, on the economic front, Casey, we are reordering our trade relationships around the world, preferring more unilateral and, in some cases, bilateral trading opportunities and kind of ending the multilateral trading regime. But more fundamentally, on the political front, undermining the NATO alliance, undermining our historic alliances, including with the UK, and really embracing Russia. This is a fundamental shift. So then we have, of course, these indictments that show definitively that Russian government officials comprehensively not just meddled in the election, but actually launched a very sophisticated cyber attack against the United States. And yes, it did occur during the Obama administration. The Trump campaign happened during the Obama administration. But it is very clear, and I think you see this from the president's own words leading up to the summit, he doesn't take this seriously, he doesn't accept the intelligence, and he will not in any way confront Putin about it.
When you learned about this, and forgive me for putting you on the spot here, but should the Obama administration have done more about this, considering what they knew? I mean, they wanted to go public. They stepped back because Mitch McConnell wouldn't go along.
Yeah, absolutely. I think what was going on was the president thought, hey, Hillary's going to win. This isn't going to matter. And so let's not get involved lest she win and then we'd be accused of being involved in the election. I think that's exactly what happened. But in hindsight, of course, the United States should have done a lot more.
Yeah. There is tonight this from the New York Times saying, quote, the same Russian military intelligence service now accused of disrupting the 2016 presidential election in America may also be responsible for the nerve agent attack in Britain against a former Russian spy, an audacious poisoning that led to a geopolitical confrontation this spring between Moscow and the West. Quote, British investigators believe the March 4th attack on the former spy, Sergei Skripal, and his daughter Yulia was most probably carried out by current or former agents of the service, known as the GRU, who were sent to his home in southern England, according to one British official, one American official, and one former American official familiar with the inquiry, all speaking on condition of anonymity to discuss intelligence. We need to note that NBC News has not independently verified the Times reporting, as this is all just coming to us. But Betsy Woodruff, pretty remarkable, especially considering the president just leaving the UK after having been there. And this is a very physical manifestation of a frankly sweeping intelligence power that is systematically trying to undermine democracies across the globe.
That's right. And the important context for this this is that none of this stuff happens without Vladimir Putin knowing about it. Putin is incredibly close with the country's intelligence services. He's deeply involved in all these different matters. It's almost unthinkable that there would have been an operation like the one alleged to have happened against the Skripals without Putin knowing about it. It's unthinkable that the 2016 election meddling would have happened without Putin thinking about it. So the question that raises is, to what extent does Trump and the rest of the Trump administration actually try to put Putin on the spot? And I don't think anyone's waiting with bated breath to see that happen. But this kind of reporting really pushes it even more to the forefront and makes it more urgent.
Brian Klaas, what's the view from London look like? This is a story that you guys have been covering pretty closely. Is there a surprise? And what is kind of the orientation and the feeling? Are you exhausted, having experienced a little bit of what we here in the U.S. experience every day, having had the president visit the U.K.?
Well, it was a remarkable visit. Donald Trump is politically toxic in the UK. He has an 11% approval rating, and that was before this bombshell Sun interview where he effectively tried to push Theresa May's government off a cliff where she is already very close to the edge. And so I think there was astonishment, bewilderment. Publicly they tried to sort of salvage the trip and make nice for the cameras, but there's a lot of anger in the British establishment towards Trump. And this comes at the tail end of a visit in which Trump trashed NATO, Trump trashed the EU, and then Trump trashed Britain. And those are all three things that Vladimir Putin very much wants to happen. So, for the last 2 decades, he's been looking to drive a wedge into the core of the West. And Donald Trump has done this for him, something the Soviet Union couldn't accomplish, something Putin couldn't accomplish. Now Trump is accomplishing it for him, heading into Helsinki. And so the British government, I think, like many Americans, is looking at this with trepidation and waiting to see what will come out of it, and not too optimistic.
On the eve of the president's meeting with Vladimir Putin, members of the Trump administration and the president himself have sought to downplay expectations.
It isn't a summit. I've heard it called a summit. This is a meeting.
The Russians have agreed that it will be basically unstructured. We're not looking for concrete deliverables here.
No state dinner, no joint statement, no deliverables that are going to be prepackaged. You don't know what's going to come out of this meeting.
I don't expect anything. I frankly don't expect. I go in with very low expectations. I think that getting along with Russia is a good thing, but it's possible we won't.
You heard Ambassador John Huntsman there insisting that tomorrow's meeting is not a, quote, summit, but that didn't stop the president from sending out these tweets just hours later saying no matter how well he does at the summit, the media won't give him any credit. Andrea Mitchell, what are your expectations inside this frame for this meeting?
Well, I think that they will come out and try to make some announcements, perhaps on arms control. But we're all inevitably going to be focused on those indictments, on how he addresses it. It's a joint news conference. There'll be at least a few questions on either side. He can try to call on friendlier reporters. I'm really struck by the fact that going into this, he again used the phrase on Twitter that the press are enemies of the people. That is a Stalinist phrase. And it goes against everything that the State Department, under both Republicans and Democrats, has done for decades to project America's belief in a free press, America's belief in the First Amendment, as American secretaries of state and presidents go to Moscow or Beijing or now in Erdogan's Turkey. To any of these totalitarian regimes, they go in, hold press conferences. At least the new Secretary of State Pompeo is, Rex Tillerson did not, as a regular matter, but emphasizing the importance of a free press. And for him to use that phrase right out of Joseph Stalin's book on the eve of a summit with Vladimir Putin is so deeply offensive to American values. It's quite remarkable.
And Mike Memoli, to Andrea's point, I mean, this is going to be something of a stunning display. I mean, usually there has been this rule that you don't criticize the American president when he goes abroad, but also American presidents have a history of defending their own free press. And I know I've also covered very carefully this Russia investigation and have read through these indictments. What did you see in there that you think we should be paying attention to tomorrow?
Well, Casey, I'm going to send you back to your 2012 Romney Rambler days because There was this moment that Republicans are fond of bringing up in 2012 when, of course, Obama on the hot mic was heard talking with President Medvedev at the time about, I'll have more flexibility after the election. And Romney really pounced on that moment. He said, this is not a moment for the American president to be holding his punches with the Russian president. And I think what we're seeing here is exactly that. It's really remarkable that he's very dispassionately speaking about the summit. There's not much he's expecting out of it, downplaying his expectations. You know who's going to be ready, who's been preparing for this? He may have been basking in the spotlight today at the World Cup, but that's Vladimir Putin. And this indictment from the Mueller team on Friday really carefully lays out their capabilities. And there's a need for the American president to respond to that forcefully, to say that this is unacceptable. And what we heard from the president today doesn't indicate he's ready to deliver that message.
It does seem like a remarkable signal, honestly, that the detail, Jeremy Bash, that was in the indictment. It seemed to almost as though they intended to tell Vladimir Putin, hey, look, this is how much we know about what you've been doing.
Yeah, it showed the depth of intelligence collection about Russian cyber attacks against the United States. But look, the administration here is kind of describing this as the Seinfeld summit, the summit about nothing. And I think the reason that's happening is because they have no idea. John Huntsman, the ambassador, John Bolton, the national security advisor, have no idea why we are having this summit. Trump hasn't told them. They haven't prepared. It's a secret meeting. It's a one-on-one meeting. This is not a summit that's going to have deliverables. There may be some vague statements. I take Andrea's points, but they're going to be totally amorphous and unenforceable. All we are going to know is that Trump is going to walk out and declare victory, declare some important objective has been achieved, but we will never know. And in fact, the administration itself has no idea what it wants to get out of this.
Betsy Woodruff, I mean, is that essentially all this is? Is this another media show? I mean, we've seen the reports in the wake of Singapore, for example, that President Trump said, oh, hey, look, there were more cameras here than there were at the Oscars, for example. Is that all that is here?
I think there's no question that that's a central priority for the White House going into this summit, that the media coverage and sort of everything attendant to the summit is just as significant as what happens in that conversation. And I think that's part of the reason that the Mueller indictments are such an important preface to this event. In fact, it's very much by design that those indictments were laid out to specifically detail at sort of the granular level how much we know about Russian hacking. In counterespionage investigations, one of the most important deterrent steps that investigators can take is called attribution. It's when you show, here's how we figured out what happened, this is what we know, and that's designed in an ideal world to deter future attacks, future hacks, future meddling. So on the one hand, you have Mueller and his team taking a shot across the bow at the Russians, saying we can name names, we've got individuals, we can zero in on who the alleged bad guys are. And at the same time, you have Trump gearing up for this summit about nothing, acting like it's not important at all, and the contrast couldn't be sharper.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me, or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.